the very last plenary. So, shh, find your seats quietly. Shh. Okay, so really quick note, you guys probably should have already gotten an email about this. So we have this exact Nespresso maker that Guillaume Lecomte, who is the CEO of Nespresso, sent basically because he thought, he came and spoke in BIP last year, thought that the questions were amazing, and I have to say this year is even better than last year. He actually said that he got better questions from Stern students than he does on earnings calls from analysts. So you guys really rock. So basically, he wanted to show his appreciation and support, and we are going, if you have asked a question during plenary at any point in the semester up until now, or tonight, by noon tomorrow, click on the link in the email I sent, put your name down there, it'll take you 1 minute, and on Wednesday, we will randomly choose someone who wins the espresso maker. All right, so what are we doing tonight? Shh. Okay, so our focus tonight is on corporate purpose, personal purpose, and nonlinear career paths. But sort of because this is the last session in BIP, it's just kind of important to take a moment to say where have we been and what are we trying to accomplish. As you know, BIP is the foundation for the social impact core. So after this, you're going on to 3 more courses each year, 1 each year. You're going to have next year Org Com, the year after that, Law, Business, and Society, and the year after that, Professional Responsibility and Leadership. And so you will be seeing this development over time in the material that we're covering, and it's helping to define Stern's distinctive identity because we are the business school that is best known for global and social impact. There also are, I'm hoping that you're kind of recognizing or sort of covering over the course of the semester, you feel like you've been exposed to critical issues in society today, what people are talking about and are concerned about, that you've learned about how the boundaries between different sectors, market, state, and community are fundamentally permeable, and the ways that these overlaps are being negotiated right now and changing all the time. That you're thinking about what we covered in terms of public goods under threat. And right now, in all these opportunities to create shared value, many of you have already turned in, probably almost all of you, have turned in your own call to corporate action for how businesses can create better shared value in society today. Hopefully, this course is intended to bring alternative perspectives and a different understanding of the social impact of business, not just into the social impact core classes, but basically into your field-based courses. So you guys should be kind of coming out of this class, you should be asking your economics professors about the market failures that we've been talking about, all the ways that things fall between the cracks and it just doesn't make sense. You should be asking that's your economics professors, ask your marketing professors if it is appropriate and ethical to be leading people to buy stuff that they don't need and that will only raise inequality and impoverish them. You should be asking your finance professors whether the financialization of our economy is a good thing or a bad thing. So you should be bringing these questions, be thinking about these questions in all of your field-based courses, as well as seeing connections between the material that we're covering in this course and the material that you're covering in your core in arts and sciences that most of you are in large part immersed in. Where I feel like that's repetitive. And I'm hoping that tonight and this course is getting you started on thinking about what are the core values that you will use to find your sense of personal passion, to figure out what you want your career and your contribution to be for the next 3 years at Stern, how you can leave your mark on this institution, which each of you will, and how you want to leave your mark in your career and in your life when you leave here. What is purpose? So what we've been talking about, and this is a topic that we've talked about a few different times over the course of the semester. It's come up in a number of the plenaries, and its value has been articulated. So purpose is what the French would call a raison d'être, the reason for being. Your reason for being, a corporation's reason for being, an institution's reason for being. There's a way of thinking about it in terms of just 3 fundamental components. You ask yourself, what is the value that you or the organizations, the groups that you're a part of, what's the value that you can create? For whom? Who are you creating it for? And what do you want the impact to be? How will the world be different as a function of what you've done or what your organization has done? That's all that purpose is. But it's incredibly powerful. And so I want to share with you before introducing our speakers just one example of some research done here at Stern in collaboration, admittedly, with some Harvard professors, but we'll overlook that. But some research here at Stern on the impact of purpose and its impact on sort of fundamental financial performance. What you have is return on assets, kind of a classic measure of corporate financial performance. And this is the judgments of purpose come from more than 500,000 people filling out surveys for the Great Places to Work survey. So these are hundreds of the largest organizations in America are represented here. And there were 2 different dimensions. They asked about things like camaraderie, sort of items that reflect how much do people enjoy coming to work, feel like they get along with their bosses, with their coworkers, all the kinds of things that you'd think would make for an organization that's more effective, more coordinated, where everyone is happy. That's the gray line. And the black line is people's feelings about how clear was the organization's sense of purpose. And you can see that the factors that you would think would be a critical determinant of financial performance, those camaraderie factors, how happy you are at work, how much you get along with others at work, that had no impact. That's basically a flat line. No impact on financial performance, but clarity of purpose had a strong impact. And it turns out that what was responsible for that was not every employee in the organization. In fact, it really didn't matter what the sense of purpose was for the lowest level salaried employees or the highest level top executives of the organization. What was driving this effect was the managers and the professionals. That level of people who are kind of getting things done, that's where a sense of corporate purpose or a clarity of corporate purpose really ended up shifting the possibilities in terms of, or the potential for an organization to realize financial performance. So I think this is just kind of setting up the discussion that we're going to have for today, kind of a sense of what corporate purpose can do and can mean. But I have two fantastic speakers who can really reflect on this issue of corporate purpose, personal purpose, nonlinear career paths, and the relationships between them. I'm going to introduce them incredibly briefly and then ask them to tell you their personal stories more directly. So first I want to introduce, and I'm just going to, first I want to introduce Tansy Whalen, who is currently the head of our Business and Center for Sustainable Business here at Stern. You'll hear about her background. And Kibby Anderson, who is currently the head of digital strategy and business development at Bloomberg. Join me in welcoming Tansy and Kibby. Okay.
All right, testing.
So,
can you hear me?
It'll work.
Hopefully it'll work, yes.
Okay. So what I'm hoping to do is to start out by asking you both to tell your personal stories. Just describe how your life and career has evolved. Thank you. And those are yours to keep. Any turning points or notable events that got you to where you are today. Maybe, Kibby, would you be willing to start?
Yeah, that's a big question. Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So many awesome faces in the audience. I remember when I was sitting where you guys were, so many years ago. So hopefully this will be helpful and valuable and kind of giving you some insight into how to think about your next choices as you figure out your life going forward. So yeah, I am originally from Seattle, Washington. I am the product of a single mother, raised as an only child. Grew up in a household full of love, but not very many resources financially. I was what you called a latchkey kid, so I had to get myself up, get myself ready to go to school, leave, lock the door, go to school, come back home, figure out my dinner, and my mom would come home later on because she was working. And so that definitely influenced a lot of my development. I was very independent as a young child, and I was one of those people that was very curious and was not afraid to take initiative to find out new opportunities that I could experience. So talking about pivotal experiences in my life, I would say one of the first one was I went to a leadership program for kind of high-achieving students in high school the summer after my, I think, sophomore year. And I ended up meeting a young girl who was from Singapore. Kids were coming from all over the world, and we were there for this program to kind of learn more about what it's like to be a leader in your community, in your school. It's really powerful, but I met a young girl from Singapore, and we just really hit it off. She was really nice, and she talked about how amazing the food was, and I'm influenced a lot by food because I love to eat, and there's a reason why this is important. So go back home to Seattle. I get a flyer in the mail, and it's actually promoting a school or a program that has schools all over the world. And basically, they would recruit kids from various countries right after their sophomore year of high school, and you would go and study abroad for 2 years, and you would live and interact with kids from all over the world. It was called the United World Colleges Program. I don't know how many of you guys may have heard of it, UWC. And it turned out they had a school in Singapore. And so I was like, wow, how amazing would it be for me to go and actually meet my friend and eat all the amazing food that she talked about in Singapore and have an opportunity to study with people from various parts of the world. And so I decided to apply. And I actually went through the entire process of getting my applications together, writing my essays, the whole nine. And then I submitted my application, and I actually got in. And it wasn't until I got in that I actually told my mom that I was thinking about moving to Singapore. So it was definitely a bit of a surprise when I said to her, so there's a school that I want to go to. But she actually said okay, and I was really, really grateful because that was a pivotal experience because I had taken the initiative to try something. My mom was terrified to let me leave at the age of 17 to go move halfway around the world. And she got a lot of criticism from her fellow parents because they felt she was not being a good parent by letting me go. But she withstood that, and I really appreciate her taking the time to do that because that experience of living and studying for 2 years in a foreign country changed the trajectory of my life. I was exposed to people who had very different cultural experiences. I went to school with people from Europe, parts of Asia, parts of Africa. It was really, really powerful. And it, I think, opened my eyes, this young girl who had been from a small city of Seattle, to what was possible in the world. And it eventually landed me at Harvard, where I went to college, and where I ended up studying East Asian studies, and eventually decided that I really wanted to focus my life on helping to let other people understand what experiences that people around the world were having. And that, for me, became the process of learning and becoming a filmmaker. So I ended up really, really becoming passionate about storytelling and filmmaking, and that was heavily influenced by my experience just living and traveling abroad and actually being able to be exposed to so many different types of stories myself. So that's a pivotal story I'll share to start.
I'm just wondering if you could at least take us to how did you end up getting through Stern and to where you are now?
Yeah, so graduated from college. So I will say one of the other experiences I had when I lived in Japan, actually. So when I was in school, in college at Harvard, I studied abroad for a year living in Japan. And one of the experiences I had that really influenced my desire to want to become a filmmaker was I would always get stopped by people who were Japanese, and they would ask me questions about what it was like to live in America. And the answers were always very one-dimensional because they were seeing a lot of movies that had people of color in them that had only limited examples. So I got asked a lot, like, do you live in a ghetto? Like, are you a singer? Like, do your brothers play basketball? Like, all the stereotypical things you would see when you think about kind of people of color, black people specifically, in movies. And I just got really frustrated because I was like, no, I'm this like nerd from Seattle, and I lived in a house, and we ate regular food, and it wasn't like crazy. And I was like, there's something to this. So I realized how powerful the impact of media and images have on people's perceptions of folks. So long story short, I decided when I got out of college that I wanted to work in the film and television industry. So Batya didn't say this, but I spent about 8 years working in the film industry, and I'm an Emmy Award-winning film producer. And when you talk about passion, a lot of what drove me was my passion around wanting to rectify what I felt was a limited like I said, was just limited stories about people that look like me and people that look like friends of mine, my Asian friends, my Indian friends. There just wasn't enough out there that was competing against mainstream storytelling. So I spent about 8 years working in the film industry and ended up shifting to work on the finance side of the business because as I realized when I was producing that a lot of the control and influence of what stories were told was actually controlled by the people who had access to the money and the distribution. And I wanted to be on the power side. So I decided to shift to work on the media finance side of the business and began running a media finance practice, which basically put together money to fund film and TV projects. And I did that for about 4 years, and then the financial crisis of 2008 hit, and everything changed. Like all the banks were not willing to fund film projects or TV projects because they were considered risky. Everyone was kind of fleeing and wanting to go to the most safest thing just to make sure that they could actually keep their own banks open. So I spent some time. So once that happened, I realized, okay, I need to probably make a shift when it comes to what I'm doing because they're not doing media anymore here. And that's when I decided to go back to business school. And again, I think that was a pivotal experience just because, I had made a decision to shift to work within finance. And then the whole world kind of blew up. And I kept asking myself, well, what am I going to do? I couldn't really go back to film because no one was making movies at that time. Finance was really, really dead just because nobody was really wanting to do anything on the finance side of things. And I had worked as an independent producer, and there wasn't really any money to fund my projects. So I really was at a crossroads, and I was like, okay, where do I go from here? And as I think many people do when they're trying to figure out what their lives are, they figure, let's go back to school. So that's what I did. And Stern was one of my top choices just because they have a strong background in finance as well as media and entertainment. So it was a natural fit, and came here, phenomenal experience for 2 years studying and learning, and understanding how my industry, media, had shifted over the course of the last 10 years. So if you think about it, I'm a little older than you guys. When I came out of school, there was no Facebook, there was no MySpace, there was no iPhone, there was nothing. So the impact of digital technologies really, really was great over the last 10 years. And so by the time I decided to go back to school and kind of think about how the business was changing, there was all of these new ways of distributing content. You know, social media had taken off. Digital technologies in terms of film production and content creation had taken off. So there were all these new business models as well that were in effect, and I hadn't really had a chance to study them. So coming back to Stern was really, really powerful in helping me learn that a little bit more, get more expertise, become a digital expert. And so when I got out of school, I really wanted to stay in that space because that's really where I felt the industry was going. And was first secured a job working for ABC News in their digital practice, and then spent about 3 years there. And then now I'm over at Bloomberg, where, as Batya said, I head up digital strategy, business development. Really focused on helping them more specifically think about expanding their brand, expanding the reach of their content on digital platforms globally around the world. So,
Thank you. So Tansi, maybe you could tell us your story.
Glad to, and I loved hearing yours as well. And actually, there's a connection I'll talk about to United World Colleges too, which is pretty fun. So I grew up here in New York City, and when I was a kid, my dad worked at the Museum of Natural History, and my mom worked at something called the Vera Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. So at the museum, I got to wander around and see the scientists playing with the snakes, and I got to go to the taxidermy attic and look at them stuffing the animals, and my dad knew all the stories about the dioramas, and so I really got interested in nature, and we were lucky enough to be able to spend a lot of time hiking and camping and being outdoors. And then my mom, she taught me a lot to think about the social side of things. So I had both the social and the environmental from my dad, who was a Republican, but only until Nixon, and then he gave it up. And my mom, who was a Democrat and very active on the social side. So it was really kind of interesting. And then, growing up in New York City, but still having time to explore the great outdoors. And then I think one pivotal moment for me as a small child, I was probably 10, my grandparents lived in Mexico City when I was a kid, and I learned how to walk there. I don't remember that, but I do remember visiting them around 10. And here in New York, you saw poverty. I was lucky enough to grow up without poverty, but lived pretty far on the Upper East Side, so saw stuff, but nothing like I saw in Mexico City. And when we went out into the countryside, it's just, it really had an impact on me to see kids, really struggling the way they were struggling, kids my age. So that stayed with me, I think, in terms of being a pivotal moment. So I want to do something about that. And then what did I do? Another pivotal moment was like you, sort of was struggling here in high school. I mean, I was bored, frankly. And my mom, I think, was worried I was going to get into trouble. And so she found this great place called Simon's Rock, where you go when you're 16 and get a BA when you're 20. So I went to do that, which was really basically a tiny place, but they taught you how to think, right? Was the main thing. I was like really learning how to think, and that was really pivotal. And then I ended up transferring out and coming to undergrad at NYU. Got my degree here in political science, and then went to get my master's. And then I moved. I really wanted to go work internationally, and so after I got my master's, I worked for the first job I could get. I actually wasn't necessarily thinking I was going to go into environmental stuff. I was more focused on the international experience. Mm-hmm. So I got a job with World Wildlife Fund working in the Caribbean. My master's degree was in international communication and cross-cultural communications. Mm-hmm. So again, some similar touch points, and using media to actually affect change. So they were, I went and worked in the Caribbean on helping communities there around deforestation and other issues. And then moved to Sweden, where I was the editor of an environmental journal that the Royal Swedish Academy of Science puts out. And that's where I met my husband-to-be, who was Swedish who had gone to United World Colleges here, in Lester B. Pearson in Canada.
In Canada.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was a pivotal moment.
Yes.
And,
absolutely.
Yep. And then we moved to Costa Rica together for him to start an office for an international environmental organization. And I was there as a journalist on environment and development issues, working in the whole region. There was also some pivotal moments there, so on kind of my thinking and why I do what I do today. At that time in Costa Rica, there was a lot of concern here in the United States and in Europe about deforestation for rainforest beef, right? So in other words, we're cutting down all the trees so that people could eat their hamburgers. And there was boycott against McDonald's and other companies by the environmental groups. And I was there, and what I saw happen as a result of that boycott, which in theory was correct. Yes, there was a lot of problems happening, right? But the reality was from one minute to the next, these companies pulled out of Costa Rica and the other countries. And the people who had been working on these ranches, who were not wealthy people, suddenly no longer had any way to put food on the table for their kids. So they didn't stop cutting down forests. They shifted to slash and burn agriculture. So the problem was still there. They were worse off, right? And it was all because of an arrogance that we had about thinking that we knew best without really understanding what the issues were in the country. So that really, there was another example like that also was just made me crazy, because there was the war was happening with Nicaragua, the Contras, and there was a lot of stuff going on in Honduras where American troops were there. And I was working a lot with the local nonprofits, and this activist came down. He from an environmental group, but somehow he saw one of the military installations from the U.S., climbed in, got into trouble, got thrown in jail. This poor little environmental group had to use all their political capital to get him out, right? And then they were really screwed in terms of like the work they were trying to do. So again, that arrogance of not sort of thinking through and understanding the issues was something that was very important for me. I would say another pivotal point was a sad one, which is while I was living in Costa Rica and I was 3 months pregnant, my husband, who was Swedish, had gone home and he was in a car accident and died. So that was sort of obviously a moment that I had to live through and handle, and I moved back to New York to be with my mom and family. And the ultimate sort of, I learned a lot of lessons for that. But one lesson was that if I could handle that, I could handle anything.
Yeah, definitely.
So it sort of gave me the sort of feeling that, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to get there, and I got the strength to do it, right? Mm-hmm. Plus, I got to have a wonderful daughter who's a musician and fabulous, and so, and then just quickly to move so when I moved back to the States, I couldn't obviously travel for a bit with my daughter. I got a job at National Audubon Society, in charge of their communications program, and then I worked, I really am a social entrepreneur, so I built up that program, and then I went to a small organization called the New York League of Conservation Voters that had no staff, but had Bobby Kennedy and Larry Rockefeller on the board, and I built that into an organization, and then I built up a federation of state leagues of conservation voters around the country, and then I went to Rainforest Alliance and took that from a $4 million organization to a $50 million organization, most importantly with major societal impact, working with the mission of the Rainforest Alliance was really to change land use practices, business practices, and consumer behavior. And we worked with 5,000 companies to really transform how they do business in agriculture, forestry, and tourism in about 60 countries around the world. If you ever see the little green frog, the Rainforest Alliance frog on products helped to build that brand. So that was a fascinating experience, sort of riding the tiger of a startup, and also really looking to make sure that I found that balance of how do we help communities and companies in a way that isn't arrogant, that is learning, and helping and being a catalyst, but learning from that. And then 2 years ago, came to Stern to start the Center for Sustainable Business here, and hope to see some of you in my class in the fall.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit, and I'd like to understand how maybe others' expectations played a role in your choices. I have to admit that this is a somewhat autobiographical question for me. I come from a community where women didn't go to college, and my parents resisted the idea of me going to college. And then basically, my dad said, well, if you're going to go, you have to be an economics major. And it influenced all my choices, for the rest of my life. Most of them kind of good. But I'm wondering whether others' expectations played a role in the decisions that you've made, if you've ever made choices that were designed to kind of conform to others' expectations, or if even there were that you might have later regretted, or perhaps things that you resented at the time but later were thankful for, kind of thinking about the role of others in shaping your path. Tansi, maybe you can start on that one.
I think maybe because I'm the oldest kid, but it was always my own expectations I was trying to, catch up with, and expectations I was trying to avoid that nobody put on me. But so I'm a different generation, but I basically never learned how to type and never learned how to make coffee when I was young, because I was like, I'm not going to be a secretary, so I'm not going to learn those things. And I was like shooting myself, because now when I type on my laptop, I have to use my index fingers, so it's just not a smart thing to do, but it seemed like it made sense at the time. I did learn how to make coffee, though. But now it's easy. Get the Nespresso machine, no problem. I do have one in my office. I would say, my parents were both had a lot of respect and a lot of love for us. So I had a brother and sister too, and they really were supportive and sort of talked through everything and helped me. Just believed in what I was going to do. So I didn't feel like I had to exceed or over exceed or anything. So and then in terms of during my jobs, I was always lucky enough to find people who mentored me and who had high expectations for me to help me, but helped me meet them. So.
Thank you. Vivi?
Yeah, so I can probably give two examples, one of which was good and one of which was not so good in terms of the choices that I made. So I'll start with the first one. So yes, my mom, went to college. She has a master's degree. My grandmother, while she did not, my mother's mother, so my grandmother, while she didn't go past middle school, was just she learned from doing, and she learned from teachers, mentors. So she ended up becoming a very successful real estate developer in California. And so I had those examples of what kind of excellence and hard work looked like. And so there was definitely an expectation that I was going to go to school, and my mother's favorite phrase was, B's are not acceptable. So I was like the straight A, 4.0, class president, all of the above, overachiever, which I think served me well for the early parts of my life. So going through high school, obviously getting into the school I went to in Singapore, UWC, going to Harvard. I think, though, once I got out of school and I moved to California and I started working in the entertainment industry, unfortunately, I think this kind of necessity to actually always be seen as having everything together, I think eventually over time became a detriment to me, and I made some really bad choices. So to give you some context, I was the person who came out of college, landed a great job working for an established film director, worked on my first movie, bought 2 houses by the age of 27, came and, won an Emmy before I was 30. I had all of these things that I had accomplished very young in my age. And it created, I think, it created a sense of needing to continue to top that. And I think being within an environment like Hollywood, which is not always full of the best people. There are really amazing people there, but there are also people who I think are looking to put on airs, and they're looking to put out the perception of success. And so you feel like you have to show up and I think meet those expectations. So, if you have a house, do you have a beautiful car? If you have a beautiful car, are you showing up in the best clothes? And all that kind of stuff. And I think I've found myself getting caught up in that mentality in a negative way. And I think it also is related to this idea that I kind of lost my sense of purpose. Like, I think I was caught up in trying to keep up with the Joneses, as they say, in the industry, instead of being really focused on why I was there to begin with. And the result was actually really, really bad. Like, I ended up getting involved with some people. I dated a guy who ended up stealing a lot of money from me. I racked up a lot of debt on credit cards. Just made some bad, rented, leased a car that I could not afford just to try and keep up, a certain appearance. And eventually, I reached a point where it all kind of came crumbling down. And I ended up really having to ask myself, how did I get here? It impacted some choices I had to make going forward in my life in terms of my trajectory, because I had to pull myself out of some of these holes. And I think it was a really good lesson for me to really understand how living and trying to conform to the expectations of what society thinks you should look like, or what the groups of people you're around think you should look like, can lead you down a pathway that's not necessarily good. So fortunately, I had a lot of people around me that loved me and built me up and helped me figure out how to pull myself out of the holes that I created. And I was able to eventually kind of get back on top. But it's just a lesson for me to always be conscious of keeping, I think, your purpose first and foremost in sort of your front mirror. Because I think if you don't, it can allow you to be swayed by external influences that don't always result in very good choices.
That's great.
Yeah.
So both of you really kind of exude passion, and at least to an outsider, and which is amazing. I have to say, even just it's an honor to be sitting up here with you guys, with both of you. I'm wondering if you feel like, so maybe Kivi, you could, it seems like you're kind of going in this direction, so you'd be sort of a logical place to start. Do you feel like you have a sense of personal passion? And how did that emerge? If you did, how did it emerge? How did you find that passion, and how has it influenced your choices?
Definitely, yeah. Well, I definitely would say I'm a passionate person, and I do have a personal passion. And, as I alluded to in my initial opening story, it really boils down to my love of people and my love of hearing people's experiences. When I was a young kid, growing up, like I said, I was an only child. I spent a lot of time reading on my own, watching television, watching movies. That was how I spent my days. And that experience became kind of like my lens to the world before I was actually even able to get out there. And I realized how powerful, like I said, those images and those stories were in helping to define how I saw people, how I saw the world. And so when I went to, like I said, a country where I realized that they didn't necessarily have the same exposure that I had to different cultures, probably growing up in America. And so accordingly, their perspectives of what people like me look like were very limited. It really frustrated me, and I really began to understand, again, the power of media, the power of imagery. And for me, that became what fueled my interests in moving forward in a lot of my professional career, whether it was working as a film producer, whether it was working, at Bloomberg now, and really thinking about how, news and reporting and information that is out in the world, what perspectives are you hearing? What are you thinking about? Bloomberg has a really awesome initiative right now that we're focused on, which is about elevating the amount of female voices that are being quoted in stories and being featured on news reports in terms of giving their feedback and insight. And for me, that really speaks to the passion that I have, making sure that there's a much more diverse perspective of voices out there. And I think, you have to have people who are really, really connected to that vision and connected to that mission. And so I am one of those people. I'm sure there are many people out there who probably have a similar sense of purpose in their own lives, but that was one of the things that's really driven me. And in terms of, I think, why that came about, my mom was actually very politically active when I was growing up. She ran for public office, and she was, in many ways, working to be a community organizer and advocate for people who didn't really have a voice of their own. And so I think seeing her do what she did on a daily basis, campaigning for various people, doing various organizing to, improve communities, to ensure that people had access to different, basic resources, and all that kind of stuff definitely played a role in like how I saw myself as being an advocate as well down the road. So I think I would definitely give a shout out to my mom for helping to create that and instill that in me. Yeah.
So Tansi, you clearly have a sense of passion and it's guided your choices. How did that emerge for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it emerged, as I said, through growing up with parents that were active, through family history of my grandfather or great-grandfather started Santa Barbara News Press, and my grandfather's very active in Santa Barbara, so like my great-grandfather won a Pulitzer for opposing the John Birch Society, which I'm really proud of. And, so stuff like that was always part of my family DNA. At the same time, I'm a pragmatic person. I've never been somebody who's going to sort of throw myself in front of a tractor. I actually want to make stuff happen. I'm not a campaigner. I'm like I want to see change in the world. If I'm going to spend my time on it, and I too actually push myself too hard times, but I want it to matter. So looking at how. It's so much more fun and so much more interesting to do work for something that you're personally passionate about and that you feel makes a difference, whatever kind of difference it is, So I feel that I've been incredibly lucky to be able to be so many places, learn so many things from so many different people, from meeting a small cocoa farmer in the middle of Ghana and having him talk to me about how he's observed climate change and what he personally is doing about it, when in our own country, people with education and money pretend it doesn't exist. So I just like having those kinds of experiences are just incredible. And then I think finding those organizations, one of the things that was very exciting about working at Rainforest Alliance with all the companies we work with is that I got to work with and create, I had a CEO council that included people like Paul Pullman, who's the CEO of Unilever. We worked with the sustainability leads in companies all over the world, so not just American and European, but Brazilian and Indian and others. And all those people were like the most interesting people in the companies, right? Because they were doing something they really believed in a company where they were allowed to innovate and engage and actually go out and see, hey, I'm making a difference in people's lives. Here, I'm not just selling deodorant. I'm not just selling tea. For this tea, I'm working with 500,000 small tea farmers in Kenya who now are able to put food on the table and are growing in a way that's environmentally friendly, and I'm giving a really nice cup of tea to people who enjoy it, right? So much more meaningful than just like, here's some dried leaves, let me figure out how to like make a pretty package and sell it, right? So that I think has been really inspiring to see all of the people in business who, when they find their purpose, really create, have a lot of passion for it. So that has actually been, I'm passionate about doing that. Right? So.
Yeah, so you're kind of helping us to make the switch to focus on corporate purpose. And Tansi, you've worked with, you said, Rainforest Alliance, 5,000 organizations, and a lot of organizations that you've partnered with since you got here to Stern. And so I'm wondering if you could speak about what you've observed out there, sort of what it's like in organizations that don't have a clear sense of purpose, and what it's like in organizations that do have one, and how someone, what indicators someone like us or any of the students in this room might be looking for to kind of understand whether a company has a clear sense of purpose and what they could expect under those circumstances.
Yeah. So I think, and this is going to be really important for you as you look for, both internships and then for the jobs that you end up with when school's done, being able to find those organizations, because they really are very different culturally. So I use Unilever a lot. Unilever makes Dove products or Lipton, Hellmann's mayonnaise. Sort of a whole variety of different things. Their CEO has made a commitment to doubling their growth while having their environmental footprint, while giving jobs to 500 1,000 small producers while building brands with purpose, and I'll come back to that in a minute, while doing 100% sustainable sourcing, and has really innovated in the company and been a leader in everything from stopping palm oil to looking at sexual harassment, all kinds of stuff. The benefit of that for Unilever has been that they are the #2 or #3 most searched employer on LinkedIn, which never happens to a consumer packaged good company, right? They're way down on the list. Everybody wants to go work for finance or Silicon Valley. But it's because of their purpose orientation. And their brands with purpose have outperformed their conventional brands by 2 to 3 times. So just as an example there, we see more and more companies really recognizing, so what was interesting is that companies that articulated their purpose about what they were in business for, what change in the world they were trying to create, in the 70s and 80s, some of them, or 80s and 90s even, some of them changed their mission statements to be more about, we're in business to create profits for shareholders. That's our purpose. And if you think about it, who gets up in the morning to create profits for shareholders, right? You get up in the morning because you're excited about making a great cup of tea for someone, and as part of that, you're making profits for shareholders, right? So that shift in, I think, that sort of short-termism focus on profit and shareholder value only has been, a shift that has sort of hollowed out purpose for some companies. So looking for that, understanding that the company really is trying to do something bigger in the world, and how it's going about it. And then the other thing I would say that what's interesting to look for is what are they doing? Is there sustainability? Are there sustainability efforts? And by that I mean environmental, social, and good governance. So it's not just environmental. Are their sustainability efforts really core to them as a business, right? Are they putting out an ad saying they believe in equal opportunity for all, and yet women and minorities are paid less and don't have any C-suite positions, right? So looking for those kinds of discontinuities in what the business says it does versus what it does is important. Is their sustainability work something that they carry throughout their supply chain, throughout how they sell and things, how they're thinking about waste, how are they engaging their employees in this? Do employees feel part of it, or is it something separate from the business? Is it just a philanthropic kind of community relations exercise, greenwashing as we call it? So but when it's really embedded, it drives a lot of innovation, a lot of employee engagement, real financial performance. So it's a great, I think when you find a company that has that company is positioning itself to be competitive, to be a player in the 21st century, and one kind of company that you want to go work for.
So maybe, Kivi, I wonder if you could reflect on the same question, but more from a personal perspective, if you're willing to. So kind of the, have you ever worked for an organization that didn't have a clear and unifying purpose, or worked for an organization that did have one, and did the existence of a sense of corporate purpose or its lack influence you on the job?
Yeah, well, I've actually had fortunately, more experiences where I've worked for companies that had a corporate purpose, but I have had experiences where that wasn't the case, and it forced me to have to really ask myself, okay, well, why am I here, and what am I getting out of this? I mean, I'll just sort of tell a story. So my first job out of undergrad, prior to me starting to work in the film industry, was working for a management consulting firm, and I won't say the name, but they were on par with like a McKinsey or a Bain or a BCG. And it was a really dynamic organization full of smart people. It was a phenomenal training ground for me, just to kind of get some very fundamental skills that I've used throughout my entire career. How do you think about doing doing competitive research, market research? How do you put a deck together? How do you build a model in Excel? I mean, all the things that I use very regularly today and throughout my career. But the thing and they're, like I said, great people. I mean, we could go out, we could drink together, we could laugh, we could go to the beach and play beach volleyball. But when it came to a strong sense of like why we were all getting up in the morning from a deeper, I think, less superficial place, there wasn't anything there. And I couldn't quite figure out what it was that was not clicking, because I realized how much of a purpose-driven person I am. But I just realized that there wasn't really a strong sense of articulation from the leadership. You know, I think the focus, to your point, was really about like how do we increase the number of clients that we're, you know, selling engagements to, and that was really kind of what was driving the demands from us as from a performance perspective. And you know, after a while, you're like, okay, there's another deal, but I mean, what are we doing to really sort of impact and make a difference in individuals' lives? Whether it's something as simple as making a cup of tea, or it's, you know, helping people figure out how to find water in communities that don't have access to water. And it's ironic because I only lasted there for about a year, and it's the one place that I got actually laid off from. And I think that had to do with this disconnect. And ironically, it's the only other company that I've worked for that is no longer in business today. So I think that actually speaks to how vital I think having that sense of purpose is when you are looking to recruit people and looking to retain them. And I'll say sort of in contrast, you know, I look at something, my current employer, Bloomberg, and specifically Bloomberg Media, you know, you walk into our offices, we have, you know, 50 to 60, 70 conference rooms that we all fight over to try and have meetings. And in every conference room you walk into, there is a small booklet, maybe this big, that is our social impact statement for the year. So every room, you walk in there, and I'll never forget my interview for my job. I interviewed with the COO of media, and I'm walking in there thinking it's going to be about my skills, you know, and what's my vision for the role. And she literally asked me questions for half an hour about what I did in terms of community service and where my passions were and what are the causes I cared about. And I realized it's because that was a huge part of the kind of people that they wanted to bring to the organization. And for me, it was really, really inspiring because, you know, Bloomberg, I don't know how many of you guys know, I mean, we at our core sell terminals that help financial services professionals make more money. I mean, that's what we do. But at like a meta level, like 99 cents of every dollar that we make goes to support philanthropic work. So for me, it's an interesting and powerful balance between the two things that I think has really drawn me to the organization and kept me there, because I feel like Michael Bloomberg has done a really good job of walking that line between understanding the need to give his employees a reason to want to come to work every day, you know, beyond just helping to sell more terminals, which I think is not easy, and I think it's a testament to the kind of person he is and the kind of people he's brought together to really help the organization thrive. So hopefully that's helpful.
That's great.
Can I just add something quickly on Bloomberg? So just on Bloomberg, for example, not only on their own footprint have they done really well around their sustainability, but also like on their terminals, you can get ESG data, right? Environmental social governance data. They're the first to really make that available at that scale. They have like the gender equality index, where they, you know, sort of really assess what was happening around gender and saw financial performance. They sort of keep innovating around societal issues related to finance in their core competency. And that's, again, what you want to see in a company, is that they're saying, all right, yeah, we could just have out there the standard Bloomberg terminal, but no, they're like saying, all right, what else can we do with this? How do we use this as a tool for not only, first and foremost, delivering the financial information you need, but actually there's a whole lot more that we can be doing, and they're working on it, which I think is very cool.
Yeah, those great examples. So maybe, Tansi, I wonder if you can speak to kind of the issue of kind of career development and recognizing your own strengths and making a judgment about whether what's right in the role that you occupy, or perhaps this is something that you've observed in our students or in colleagues and friends, that, you know, the issue of, have you ever been in a role or have you known anyone in a role that maybe they believed in the purpose of the organization but realized that the role wasn't right for them, or perhaps saw a disconnect, sort of didn't believe in the purpose of the organization, even if the role itself was rewarding for them, and what are kind of the outcomes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that all of us, as we go through our careers, find moments when you're going to find it the right time to shift, and there'll be a whole series of reasons why. when you were talking, actually, I was thinking about an experience I had when I ran the group called the New York League of Conservation Voters, which worked to elect politicians, Republicans and Democrats, who are good on environmental issues. I took that job to see if I wanted to run for office ever. And one of the lessons I took away from it was that if I ran for office, I would get corrupted, because I actually like to win when I do things. So, and as far as I could see, really the only way you could win, unless you had a lot of money like Mayor Bloomberg did, you have to take money from people to whom your door is now open. And you might not think you're selling your vote, but you are selling access. You really are. Otherwise, you can't win. And if you're in a legislative body, in order to get to where you get your legislation across, you have to do everything the leadership wants. Otherwise, if you don't, they won't ever let you get to a position where you can actually have an impact. So I looked at all that and said, because I know who I am and I like to win, I would do these things. I would make these compromises to be able to get somewhere that in 20 years I wouldn't recognize myself, So I put that forward. Many of you are probably not thinking about politics, but you could be in the same place in a corporate position, right? Yeah. And you're on this slippery slope of small decisions that we talk about in our professional responsibility and leadership courses, where suddenly you're the frog in the boiling water, and you didn't know how you got there. So I think you just want to be very careful to understand yourself and think through what are you being asked to do and how are you being asked to do it, and are you comfortable with it, and if you follow it out to its logical trajectory, is that where you want to go? Mm-hmm. And then I think, other points in your careers, for me in my career, at certain points I said, well, all right, I've learned as much as I can here. I've given as much as I can give. So for Rainforest Alliance, I was there 15 years. And, I felt it was time, organizations need new leadership. And, they need new blood and new ideas. And even though I still felt I was being innovative, I think it was the right time to go for me and for the organization. So there's always those moments when you're making a decision, well, I can get a bigger, better job, or I can get a job in an organization that I like better. Mm-hmm. Because all of this, and we were talking about this earlier, the positions, when you're looking for purpose, are not necessarily linear, right? So talking with a lot of students and Stern alums, we've identified over 200 Stern alums who are active in sustainability in a variety of different ways. And they all talk about very nonlinear paths, including one at West Elm, who's director of their sort of supply chain, but it's all around sustainability and social consciousness. And actually, West Elm has a whole purpose. Your story about Bloomberg interviewing you reminded me. They have a whole purpose orientation when they talk to people coming in. They're much more interested in what their passions are and what their purpose is than their actual credentials, because I feel like if you got to that point on their resume, then you have the stuff we want. It's more like who you are, right, in the company. Anyway, I lost my point here. Oh, so yes, thank you. So they're every Stern alum I've talked to who's found that really great place. They experimented with how to get there, and they took different paths where they were looking for things that got them excited, and either they found that and they went with it for a while, or they didn't, and then they moved to something else. But because they were always innovative and looking for opportunities and reaching out within, a lot of them created their own jobs, actually, because they were seeing the opportunities where they could say, hey, here's a hole in the organization that would fit with its purpose that I can help create, and they get to know the people who could help them do that. So I've seen that a lot as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So, Kivi, I wonder if you could reflect on the same kinds of questions. Have you ever had a sense of personal purpose that didn't match up with the organizations, or maybe where you saw the kind of where you believed in the organization but didn't feel like it was right fulfilling my
specific needs at that time? Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. So I've actually done a lot of odd jobs in the midst of my producing, just to be able to support myself when I wasn't in production on something. And I worked at a nonprofit in Los Angeles called Peace Over Violence. It's the largest sexual assault and domestic violence service agency in Southern California. And I was brought in to do communications for them. They were in the midst of doing a huge rebrand of the organization. And I was asked by their executive director to just kind of come, help lead that, help plan a huge gala that they do every year for fundraising purposes, in addition to helping them think about some programming that they could do with young people around digital storytelling and how that could help young people who've dealt with violence kind of learn how to find their voices again. And it was an organization I was extremely passionate about. I was there for about a year and a half, and I had been asked after kind of the initial work that I was brought in to do around this redesign if I wanted to stay on and basically become an associate director for them to continue some of the work I was doing around the youth programming. And it was a really pivotal time because, I was still producing, but, I was really passionate about this organization. I really loved the people I was working with, and the executive director had awesome vision. And it spoke to, like I said, a lot of the core values that I have. It was young people, it was, helping with digital storytelling, kind of tapping into the things that I cared about. But I had to really ask myself, is this where I'm supposed to be? Is this really the place that I want to be? And is this going to help propel me in my career beyond sort of just serving, I think, this population? Because I had always envisioned myself doing and being a storyteller kind of on a much more broad and global scale. And it was tough. And I'll be honest, I actually initially accepted the job because I felt so strongly about it. But after about 4 days in the job, I realized that I had made the wrong choice because I wasn't supposed to be here. My time here I come and done what I was supposed to do, and it was time for me to move on and actually focus more on my film career holistically. And it was really, really tough because I had to go back and tell someone, the executive director who I really respected and admired, that I couldn't do this. And even though I knew I could, it wasn't where I was supposed to be purpose-wise. And so I had to walk away. And fortunately, she's still one of my mentors, a phenomenal supporter of me, and she understood. But it was an example of when, again, your purpose can be aligned with something, but you have to really ask yourself internally, how does this really support your overall vision for what your professional trajectory is supposed to be? And it required me to make some tough choices. So that's definitely an example, I would say.
So now we can maybe take some questions from you folks. Raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone on anything, the kind of backgrounds, corporate purpose in general. Arishi, can you bring it down? Oh, sorry, Lynn.
Hello?
Thanks, Lynn.
Hi. So we had talked earlier in the beginning about the differences between like performance in any given firm that has a very clear mission in mind and is very driven, and its employees know this. On the other side of the coin, though, what about those businesses that haven't done so well? What are some lessons that very socially minded companies can take from other socially minded companies that failed? Is there some balance between like the underlying operations and mission between the two that just wasn't there for the ones that failed, and what can we learn from that today?
Good question.
Yeah. Do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, so I think that businesses that are socially minded will fail often for the same reasons that conventional businesses will fail. They're not well managed. They don't have a good business plan. They're not strategic, right? So that would be a whole set of reasons for many failures. Another might be they might have an idea that's ahead of their time. There are a lot of energy companies that came up with innovations 10 years too early and couldn't hang on. They couldn't get enough money to hang on until actually that innovation was then taken on by somebody else. So hitting the right time, the luck to hit with your concept and your idea is again, whether it's in a sustainability innovation or any kind of innovation, you have that challenge as a company. I would say that sometimes, if it's one might be, there's a good example in a book I read about how there was a burrito company that billed itself as a company around ethics, and everything was ethics all over the place, and it failed. And the point was, right, were you going in to eat ethics with your burrito, or were you going in to eat burrito with ethics, right? And they got confused, and they thought you wanted to eat ethics. Yeah. So it didn't really help you around, sort of getting excited about the burrito.
Yeah.
So they lost sight of what their
purpose is. Yeah, definitely.
was.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. So I went to Stern to get my MBA, obviously I said that, and I remember reading in one of my courses a case that we did talking about a company that was like selling, I think like tuna, but it was like, sustainably caught tuna, and they were really pushing this message about sustainability and like, our choices and how we actually decide to catch the tuna are a lot more environmentally friendly. And so they were charging a higher price. And one of the things they never really did research-wise was to really ask, like, what's the price sensitivity of people who buy tuna? Like, are they really going to pay more just because of the sustainability element, or are they not? And if you think about it, like tuna, in many cases, is for people. Sometimes people buy it because they don't have a ton of money. So there's a lot of price sensitivity. And long story short, the company just didn't do well. And they ended up not really making the money that they had hoped with this message, just because they hadn't really done the underlying research to really understand, like, do they have a fundamental business proposition that people are going to actually want to say yes to. So I think to her point, oftentimes it's not necessarily just about the mission and the overall purpose connected to that mission, but like, do you have a business model that actually works?
But then the benefit of being at a school like Stern is kind of having the skills and tools of, of finance, of marketing, of operations, of management that you can kind of have all the, be able to put together a business model that does make sense, and then just figure out how to incorporate
Absolutely.
Purpose.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Thanks, Lynn.
Hi, so this is a question for you. I can't remember your name.
Kibi.
Kibi?
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming to speak. I actually have a question for you. So you mentioned that the need to help to be on top helped you until it didn't. So what would you advise for us now as we're navigating our business school career and we're trying to infiltrate sort of careers that you have to kind of be on top to sort of make it? What would you recommend for us?
No, that's a really good question. And I think the biggest bit of advice I would say is really be very, very laser focused on defining what your values are and like what you stand for, and like write it down. You know what I mean? Like, because it's so easy to kind of get in the room and you're around all these people and they have maybe a suit that looks really nice and they have a watch that you really like and there's all these other accoutrements that they have, and you begin to ask, well, how did you get there? And they start telling you, well, I kind of did this over here. I mean, as she was talking about earlier, that slippery slope, it only takes a few choices, and before you know it, you're in the frog in the boiling water. Because I realized that I probably didn't do that enough. And when I went through that period where, my ambition allowed me to get to a certain point, but I hadn't really coupled that ambition with a strong sense of what my values were, I was beginning to tip the other way, which was not a healthy place to be. And I think it took me sort of really having to kind of hit rock bottom and like go back to those people that really knew me. My mother, my friends who had grown up with me, my mentors, and who I was able to be vulnerable in front of and sort of say, hey, this is where I'm at. And they began to ask me, well, Kibi, like, what are you here for? Like, what are the things that helped you get to where you are today? Things like discipline, things like integrity, things like consistency that I think I kind of lost sight of because I was looking at the shiny things over here. Once I was able to get really connected to those core values again, it allowed me to not only, like I said, kind of pull myself back from some of the mistakes I had made, but to actually do even more than what I think I was able to, what I thought I could do, leveraging some of the not so positive choices I was making. So I think there's this idea sometimes that you have to be, you have to get a little dirty in order to be successful, and I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think it's really about being very clear and specific about who you are and allowing those values to propel you to be around people that have similar values to help push you forward. So does that helpful? Make sense? All right.
Did you write it down yourself?
Afterwards I did. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the lesson I learned the hard way. So definitely don't learn it my way.
So students can ask questions who are outside the room, about a third of them.
Okay.
So this question is from Laura. what role do you think the rise of the internet or the rise of technology has played in businesses adopting more sustainable practices?
Yeah, so I think it's been huge. We're in this era of radical transparency. So 10 years ago, nobody knew what was happening in a company's supply chain or in its manufacturing. I could do not everything, but it could do a lot of things without people knowing about it. And now with anybody being able to take a picture anywhere, a video anywhere, immediately you know about what a company's doing. So that has really upped the stakes for companies. And those companies that are ignoring that are seeing major challenges and problems with it. So I would say it's been, although we have challenges with this information world, rich world that we're in today, one of the benefits has been that it has required and will continue to require a whole new level of transparency around environmental and social issues from business. And because of that, and you're actually in the business of that.
Digital strategy.
Yeah. Because of that, one other point I would make for students going out into the workplace is that there's a new set of skills required, which is learning how to manage and deal with a lot of different stakeholders and figuring out win-win solutions for stakeholders. It's no longer that shareholders are the only stakeholders or employees are the only stakeholders or NGOs are the only stakeholders. You actually have to manage your way through a whole broad, complex network. So students who understand that, have the skills to deal with that, I think will also be able to parlay that into good opportunities.
Yeah. And I would just add, I think an additional benefit of the impact of social media and the internet is that companies that may not have in the past been able to have exposure on such a large level, and to be able to find their tribe, find their buyers, find their users, are now being able to do that more. I found myself finding so many amazing things on Instagram, on Facebook, companies that are making awesome products that have a mission or a purpose that I really care about, that I would have never heard of prior to the introduction of social media. So I think that's another benefit as well. Just you're able to, people who may not have the resources to take out major media campaigns on television or on radio or the like, are able to still get their message out and find people who can actually become supporters and become ambassadors and consume their product and share the good to other people and ideally help them grow. So that's been really nice. Yeah.
So a sense of accountability to those that don't have it, an opportunity for those that do. Yeah, that's really neat.
I think there was a question over there.
Over here.
So I have a question for Kiwi. So I completely agree that businesses should be purpose-driven, and purpose-driven businesses do perform better sometimes. But do you think that people, especially young people like us, should have clearly defined purposes like those, or should we allow for more space for flexibility? And should we sometimes we do change our purpose as we learn more and know more and experience more. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that being open and receptive to new data to help you understand and evaluate whether or not something you may have initially believed in is what you should continue to believe in is absolutely necessary. I think about, just the example I gave in terms of some of the choices I made in my early career that I probably would never make now in my later career because I've learned lessons. I've had things taken away from me, or I've had doors open leveraging certain values and purpose-driven ideas that I may not have had in the past. So I think it's a fine line. I think at your core, again, for you to navigate the craziness of this world and the reality that you're going to be asked and confronted with things that may not always be the right choice, having at least a core sense of who you are and what you care about, where you come from, what your values are, what are the things that, what does truth mean to you, I think is really helpful. But beyond that, there's so much color that can come in to help influence those things by life experience. And the person that you are today, in college may not be the same person you're going to be, 10 years from now. When you have children, when you have a wife, all those things begin to play a role into how you think about purpose and passion. I have friends who, when they were single, had a very one specific purpose, but when they had children, it completely changed, and their purpose became about, how do I create a better world for my children, or how do I think about, creating magic in the lives of other mothers, and that's kind of what helped drive them. So I think it's inevitable that you're going to ultimately shift and move, but I do think that there is sort of those core kind of tenets that will always stay with you, because I think that's what helps become your guiding kind of like light, like your North Star. So as you make choices, you're always kind of leveraging those things to begin to make choices that are going to be good for you. Come on, you guys have some more questions out there, I know.
Maybe we can take one more.
Thank you. What would you say is the greatest threat to future sustainability? And as consumers, how should we model our buying behavior?
It's just a small question.
I'm like, oh, that's a big one.
Biggest threat to future sustainability. Us not acting with the urgency that we should have on issues of climate change, water, social inequity. There's so much inertia, whether it's in business or in politics or as individuals. It's very hard for humans to change quickly. And we've got some really challenging issues that we need to proactively deal with, and we're not acting fast enough. So for me, that's the biggest challenge, is how we move beyond that inertia. And so you asked sort of as individuals. So I don't know how many of you know Margaret Mead was, but she was an anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, and one quote she had was, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. Because people start to think, well, what can I do, right? But a movement starts with one person. Change starts with one person, right? So that's what we've got to remember is, and also the other part is you asked, what can we do as consumers? And we as Americans, I think, should think about ourselves as citizens more than consumers, right? Because we tend to think of ourselves as consumers. I mean, just think about that word. It's like, and so rather than thinking about ourselves as having stuff, how about thinking of ourselves as being somebody, and in being somebody, figure out the change we want to make in the world, right? And that change can be small. I'm not saying you have to go and start an Occupy Wall Street movement or be the leader of a big national, international organization or whatever. But what is that change that you can make? And then how can you contribute to us moving faster on these issues? And going into business, you can do that, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be my 2 cents on that. So thanks for asking.
That's a good one.
That's a
What she said.
very inspiring ending. So we're going to stop here. End of the